Welcome back. My name's Ali. I'm here with Luke, and today we wanted to go in depth into a concept that we might have briefly mentioned once or twice on a previous podcast. And that idea, it's actually something I've heard Tony Robbins talk about before in the past. And it's this framework of understanding your life and your kind of life narrative or life story, if you will. And the framework is this: it's story, state, and strategy. Sometimes people switch up story and state, but essentially what that framework means is, well, we all have a life story. We all have a series of events, a series of memories, a series of things that have happened to us and that we've been a part of growing up. And those things help inform us of who we are. And that information that we embody and we carry with us, it becomes our state. And that state, well, that allows us to formulate a strategy for our future. But the problem that comes up with that is, well, if the story you're telling yourself is a negative one or not one that necessarily serves you, then, well, that state of mind that you get is also one that is perhaps not empowering, one that causes you to doubt yourself as opposed to letting yourself flourish in the way that you need to. And then ultimately, well, if that's what you're embodying, well, what strategy are you going to implement? You're going to implement a strategy that doesn't serve you, that perhaps you're not reaching as far as you could, you're not reaching your potential, you're not actually, making the goals or the moves that you really should be given the person who you are and who you know you could be. So that's essentially the framework. So I'll throw it over to you, Luke. What is your take on this framework? Do you think it holds up in terms of actually using it as a way to both reflect on your life, but also plan forward in whatever endeavors you may have, but also how can you personally see this being relevant to your life? And perhaps you've used something like it before to navigate difficult times in your life, but also to use that difficulty to empower you, to strengthen you, to move forward and achieve whatever it is that you need to.
Yeah. So I love the concept. So the way I kind of look at it is it's your classic kind of origin story. Yeah. So everyone has that origin story, just taking it off from the MCU, comics and all that, because I love superheroes. So everyone has their own kind of origin story, and it's always, if you take your life story, right, it's and you look at it on a line, these sequence of events have happened to you, right? So it is what it is. You can't change the fact that maybe you lost a parent growing up. You can't change the fact that maybe, you had to move schools a lot. Maybe you came from a different country. Like, those events and the sequence of your life, they're set in stone. So the only thing that changes is how you interpret it, or again, give power or meaning to it. And that's exactly kind of that framework that you're explaining. So if we all have our origin stories, so then you look at it and go, all right, well, where do I give meaning to these certain events in my life? And similar to what you were saying, is it positive or negative? Is it building me up to who I am and who I could be, or is it tearing me down every single day? So main reason why I love people like Batman and all these other superheroes is they've always used, and we'll take Batman for example, is he's always used his trauma to channel like his energy or his thoughts or his mission or his little Cape Crusade to save Gotham. He's always channeled that into a positive direction. So he's used past trauma and used that to actually better, whether it's Gotham as a whole or anything like that. So using something that happened to you and actually re-energizing it to suit a better need. So I've always kind of had that kind of outlook on it. So for my own personal life, I've always thought steel's forged through fire. So I've always been able to use any negative experiences of my life and being able to go, okay, well, there's two routes I can take. This can either break me or it can build me. And if it can build me, then let's utilize it. Let's extract the lessons from it, the experiences, the pain, the suffering, recycle that pain and use it for energy, or use it for wisdom, or use it for any means necessary moving forward, but moving forward, not to be stuck, not to just be sitting there and going, oh, well, woe is me, this event has happened to me and it's crushed me and I can't move forward because I'm always associated to being this poor kid that might have not had a lot growing up, so I'm always going to be like that. It's like, well, you have two options. What way do you want to go? Do you want that define you completely, that one event? Thus, if it defines you, it breaks you, or do you want to use that event and channel it into a better, more constructive way to then, I guess, move forward throughout your life?
Yeah.
And that's how I've done that. Yeah, and that is, I guess, the framework of state, story, strategy. You kind of always have two roads to walk down, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I will note is the reason why the order of story and state can be changed up, because it is a reality that your state of mind will actually also change the way you perceive past events. So it's not that your story is what it was and then that creates a state. The state you're in when you're reflecting back on your story can also further make it worse or better than it is. It's the same thing as, when you're hungry or you're tired, you become so much more angry so much more easily, because it's not because the narrative or the story of your life in that moment is something that deserves anger. It's because your state is, you're tired, you're hungry, you're hangry, like that's creating this state of mind, and that's changing the way you're interpreting things. So strategy always pretty much comes last, but the way that story and state interact are kind of interchangeable in that sense. So that's, I guess, an important thing to keep in mind of, because people might think that they're looking back on their life in a totally unbiased way, when in reality, if you're already depressed or you're already going through a negative time in your life and you're looking through that lens backwards, well, of course the bad stuff's going to automatically stick out so much more powerfully than any good things. And furthermore, if you're just sometimes you just wake up on the right side of the bed, and there's no reason why everything should just feel effortless today and feel so lovely, but sometimes that's just the state you're in, and then the story you make about your life today is just one that's really, really pleasant. So those two do have that unique interaction, but ultimately, whichever way you do choose to package it, I think, story, state, strategy is a simple one to go with. And that analysis of, that origin story, that progression of, the things you've experienced, the things you've gone through, and how that's informed your identity, and how that allows you to, direct yourself going forward. And perhaps that's the next thing we can talk about, is when it comes to strategy, like actual strategy part of it, what in your mind is the best way to incorporate, this reflection into a forward outlook. So looking back on your life and the things you've gone through, how does that, allow us to better judge where our next step should be looking into the future?
Yeah. So I think, to the core of it, you got to make sure you do, in terms of the strategy, right? You got to make sure you take time to do the analysis on what had happened. So I think that's, to me, I could be missing a step, but to me, I think that's the first step, because if you're going to form a strategy, and any strategy, it needs to be based on a few things. You got to have, of course, logic. You got to make sure you've calculated any potential risks. You got to make sure you've, I guess, thrown all the balls in the air and juggle them and go, okay, I know kind of what should go what way, what weight should shift this way. And then, so you get that through doing an analysis. So you can look at your life, your origin story, your past events, and go, okay, well, this happened. Okay, so sweet. I think a big one is what's in my control and what's out of my control. Reflect on that, and then you summarize all of that nice and neat, bring it towards the actual present, and then to actually make and execute a strategy, you got to make sure you've, for me personally, strategy probably comes a bit natural to me just through past experience, but if I get that analysis right, then I just sit down in the moment, make a bit of a game plan of where I need to go. And then you have to decide, okay, well, what are the cards that you actually have today, like right in front of you? Yeah. Because you can use the tools that you have, and that's obviously what you need, but you also need to understand, well, what don't you have and where can you get that? Because that's when your friends come into it. That's when loyalty plays a big part. That's when you need to lean on other people to gain kind of additional resources, to gain additional knowledge, or whatever it is, whatever your form of resources is. And it, I guess, turns into resourcefulness, that you have to actually be able to pinch all these things and then go, okay, cool. So what do I have now? What can I control? Because control what I can control. What don't I have? And what do I need to get to then get to where I want to be? Whether that's overcoming some past trauma that you've had and you want to get to a better state mentally, well then sweet, what do you actually have to do? Well, you might not share your feelings a lot, so let's start doing that. Maybe you got to go to therapy, maybe you got to do all these other things, but you won't be able to get there with the cards that you do have. So you have to be prepared to shuffle the deck, be prepared to go, really to just put your hands up and say, well, I can't get there enough. Let's let my ego die a bit. Let's actually just take a step back, breathe and go, well, who can help me and who would help me?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the really profound part of that is the amount of muscles that process will flex, because not only are you practicing, you know, this mindful reflection on your life and who you are, but also patience and also effective goal setting. You're doing so many things as a part of this system. And I think that's why it's so powerful, because not only is it just a mental framework, but also just in the way that you organize your life and the behavioral patterns and skills that you cultivate. Those are also so helpful and so crucial to living an effective and efficient life as you progress and grow up and as you enter adulthood, regardless of what stage of life you're at. If you have a good understanding of what these skills are and how you can implement them to your benefit, well, of course, that's something that will give you an edge when you are creating that strategy for yourself and you are, carving out the life that you want to be living.
You mentioned in a few talks that you've done about a very prominent person in I guess I won't spoil it. You talk about a very prominent person and you give the example of state story strategy. So would you be able to just summarize that in I don't know, a shortened version or however you will? Sure. But I think it's very powerful because a lot of people, they need that visualization to say, okay, that's how this framework is actually applied. But I know the first time when you were speaking to me about that and you use that example, you really sit back and go, oh wow, that's black and white. That's this path or this path. So
no, definitely. So the example is of this young African American woman, and she grows up in a very abusive household. She's sexually abused. She's just really put through negative trauma. She grows up in poverty. She doesn't really have access to proper clothing. It's all just very, a very violent and traumatic environment for a child to grow up in. And this individual falls pregnant at 13. The baby is a miscarriage, so she loses the baby. And then she kind of progresses through her high schooling, and a lot of things, so much went poorly for her, so much went bad in her life. Like, it's truly an unfair allocation of just bad cards in her hand. But the one thing I guess she did have going for her was that she was just good at talking, good at communicating. And the way that you can frame that story now is you can look at what that life origin story is, and it's quite a depressing one. There's not a lot of hope attached to that. You just see all these, whether that's rape, abuse, sexual violence, just poverty, just all these effects that could severely stunt the development of a human being if that trauma is truly set in. But this individual, rather than focusing on the negative stuff, that you couldn't even blame someone for falling victim to that, because of course that's a terrible life. No one would ever blame that person from just collapsing and not being able to function as a human being. But this person, rather than taking that state of mind, she took another state of mind. She really focused on her strength, her ability to communicate, her ability to empathize with other people. She really capitalized on that, and because of her suffering, she knew that she was a better communicator and could actually understand people better because of it. And then she went on to join the local television news, and she progressed from there. And in fact, the story I'm telling is the one of Oprah Winfrey. So huge, like one of the most powerful women in the world. And that was her life. She had no right to be as successful as she was. Like, she had every right to just give up and say, whatever. Like, this life was not meant for me. Like, I just didn't get a good hand. I don't have to try now. And no one would ever blame her. But the sheer, audacity she had to actually see that upbringing, see that life that she was dealt, and actually overcome that in such a proactive and empowering way that helped millions of other people as well along the way. Well, that's just a credit to no one else but to Oprah and what she did with her own mental, framework, that her own organizing of like what that state that's going to create and what strategy she's going to go on from that. That is all Oprah's victory. No one else can take that from her. No one else can take credit for it. That's something that she did. So I think that story is a very powerful one. It's a good one to share because it does show you exactly as you're saying, the black and white difference between what a really debilitating and negative experience in life can actually be used to be constructive in your life and in the lives of other people.
Thanks for tuning in to the Prometheus Podcast, where we aim to bring the fire back to the people.